Nobody loves graphs as much as I do.
Bullshit.
To you how much we spend on defense. Now, look, before we show you the graph, understand that the super committee failed, so we're supposed to take out $600 billion from spending, social spending, and also $600 billion from the Defense Department.
On August 2nd, 2011, President Obama signed into law the Budget Control Act. 5 years later, it's worth reflecting on how it came into existence and what it has meant for the U.S. military. In the spring of 2011, the federal deficit was projected to peak at $1.5 trillion. Republicans had just taken control of the House. Democrats wanted to increase the debt ceiling, but Republicans insisted on dollar-for-dollar cuts in spending. Both sides refused to yield, forcing a fiscal standoff. What emerged was the Budget Control Act, a resurrection of a much older law known as Graham-Rudman-Hollings. The BCA reinstated budget caps for the discretionary parts of the federal budget. These caps were set to meet a deficit reduction target over the next 10 years. For defense, this meant about $1 trillion less than the president had requested. Like the original Graham-Rudman-Hollings law, the BCA created an exception for war funding, but we'll get back to that in a moment. The BCA was really intended to be a forcing function for a broader budget deal, so the law created the so-called Super Committee with special authority to propose a deficit reduction package subject to a simple up or down vote in both chambers. It also resurrected sequestration, the automatic process of making across-the-board budget cuts. After the first year of enforcement, however, sequestration is only triggered if Congress appropriates more than the budget caps allow. Despite much finger-pointing after the fact, the BCA passed with bipartisan majorities in both chambers. A lot has happened since the BCA was enacted. By November 2011, the Super Committee officially gave up, unable to forge a broader budget deal. Throughout 2012, defense leaders repeatedly warned about the consequences of the cuts imposed by the BCA, but steadfastly refused to plan for it.
And now the wolf's at the door.
In January 2013, Congress passed a last-minute budget deal that increased the budget cap slightly for 2013, but it paid for these increases in part by reducing the caps for 2014. By March, time had run out, and sequestration was triggered. The across-the-board cuts forced DoD to cancel training, delay maintenance, and furlough more than 600,000 civilian workers.
So let's take a look and see how much we do, in fact, spend on defense and get a sense of our priorities. When you combine the Department of Defense, the Veteran Affairs, and Homeland Security, we spend 59% of our discretionary budget on these military items. 59%. By comparison, the Department of Education, 6%. That's about 10% as important as defense, apparently. How much do we spend on justice? I love that. 2% on justice. 60% basically on defense. Now, do you think this has anything to do with how much we need to defend this country? Are you kidding me? We spend 42% of all military spending in the world. 42% of it is spent by the United States. How much more defense do we need?
Okay, this is the next chart is what keeps me awake at night. If you look at that, that's the structure of our R&D accounts. And I've been talking about this for some time. If you look at the science and technology accounts at the bottom of the chart, 6, 1, 2, and 3, we have in this administration for the last several years protected those accounts very well. They're reasonably constant. We had $12.5 billion roughly in those accounts this year in the 17 request. They've been protected. This is the science and technology that ultimately comes into our weapon systems. It includes university research, includes a lot of basic research at our laboratories and with our defense contractors and with commercial industry. Okay, so that's the force after next, if you will, that technology supports. Then you come up to and I'm going to go to the top of the chart next. 6, 7 up at the top is the upgrades to the things we have, for the most part. There are a couple of other things in there as well, but it is for the most part the upgrades to the things that we have. And what this chart tells you is that is by far the biggest of our research and development accounts right now. That's where we're investing more money than anywhere else, upgrading the things we have. The reason we're doing that is we're keeping them a lot longer than we had planned. And so we're inserting upgrades of technology to them where we can to prolong their lives and to enhance their capabilities. Then there's the part that I'm worried about the most. That's the 6.4 and 6.5 accounts. This is what I call our new product pipeline. 6.4 is the risk reduction work you do before you commit to development for production. So this is where our new products that we're to some degree committed to exist in the budget. And you can see the drop in those since the mid-2010 era, the first 5 to 10 years. And in fact, the 6.4 account is now and has been for some time bigger than the 6.5 account. 6.5 is engineering and manufacturing development. It's the stuff where we're making the big commitments to get ready for production and do production representative prototypes. That one is well below our experimental risk reduction work now. Now, what we did in this budget, that concerns me. I didn't bring it with me because it's classified, but I'll describe it to you. I've had the intelligence community build charts for me. They're poster-sized charts that show all of the products, the new product pipeline for our potential adversaries, our more near-peer competitors, China and Russia. And if you look at both of them, China in particular, though, they're dense with new products. A couple of years ago, I had the same poster made for the United States, for the Department of Defense, and it's a lot of white space. There's a significant difference in the rate of modernization, the scale and scope, breadth and depth of modernization between us and our most challenging adversaries. And that's because of these charts, because we're not spending as much on new product pipeline.
Rebuild it, rebuild it, rebuild it. You're not rebuilding it when it looks like this. Okay, for everybody listening on the live show and you can't see this, this is the discretionary spending in 2015. And it shows you what percentage of that is military spending. 54%. 54% of discretionary spending is military spending. Everything else is a tiny amount. So to be fair to Ted Cruz, though, he says, Obama has weakened our military. Well, years ago, it is true that it was 56% of discretionary spending. Now it's 54%. Oh my God, we're so weak!
Twitter user The Deviant Craft sent us a question asking, military spending is out of control. How much would you think we can downsize it before we start putting national security at risk? Well, in terms of pure dollars, the United States spends just a little shy of $600 billion a year on military. That accounts for 54% of all federal government discretionary spending. $600 billion. Now, militaries combined around the world, all the largest countries and some of the smaller ones, all put together, including the United States, spend $1.6 trillion. So that $0.6 trillion is just what the United States spends. Everybody else together combined spends $1 trillion. The next closest country to the United States in terms of military spending is China, who spends about $215 billion a year. So we could cut our government spending in half and still beat our closest competitor.
No, dude, no fucking way! Stop! Stop!
Hi, I'm Miriam Pemberton. I'm a research fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. I direct their Peace Economy Transitions Project. The Soviet Union was our peer adversary. They were trying to match us with their military spending. They no longer exist, and no one is trying to match us now.
What prompted it was Putin's invasion of Crimea and then eastern Ukraine.
The question that came up was, what could Russia potentially do to NATO?
We didn't want to spend a year building a computer simulation before we could start getting results. So gaming was the ideal analytical tool.
We've conducted 18 of these games involving players from across the Department of Defense, U.S. commands in Europe, and also NATO allies.
What we found out was pretty unambiguous.
Russian forces could basically reach the capitals of Latvia and Estonia 36 to 60 hours after the war started.
It was a rather shocking finding.
The Russians were bringing about 450 tanks to the fight. NATO was bringing none.
And then there's simple geography.
It's only 135 miles or 27 hours from Pskov to Riga, and that's if they move at 5 miles an hour, which is slower than the Washington Beltway on Thanksgiving weekend.
Ultimately, the point is not to fight Russia and win. The point is to deter Russia from ever undertaking aggression against the alliance.
What military force would be required to just change the perspective of this conflict?
The Department of Defense has asked for $3.4 billion as their European reassurance initiative. That's a fourfold increase.
It's all happened since we've begun talking about this.
We've had an effect in accelerating the realization of the severity of this problem inside the U.S. government and inside the NATO alliance.
Called SIPRI has released a new report about defense spending. And the U.S., congratulations, of course, is number one. Everybody knows that. We spent an astounding $698 billion on our military last year. You know how much of an increase that is over the last decade? An 81% increase. What's going on? Are we about to be invaded by the Soviet Union or Red China or Canada? Why are we increasing our defense spending so much at a time when we are told we have to do draconian cuts here at home when we have tremendous unemployment? In the middle of 8.8% unemployment, we're cutting people's food stamps, we're cutting Medicare, we're cutting Medicaid. The president is agreeing to half these cuts. You know, we're going after all these incredibly important programs, but we're increasing defense spending. And by the way, yes, in the Republican plan, where they say, wow, we got to cut this, cut everything to the bone. They increase defense spending. Absurd. Have we not increased it enough? We spend 6 times more than our next closest competitor, China. 6 times more. Would we really be in a lot of trouble if we just spent 5 times more than China? Overall, U.S. defense spending is 42.8% of defense spending for the whole world. So basically, we nearly double the rest of the world in how much we spend. Nearly half of the military spending in the entire planet is by us. Have we not spent enough? Of course we should cut defense spending. It is outrageous and absurd to claim that we should increase military spending. Our advantage at this point is colossal and overwhelming.